should be all. Not sure. Let's wait for it.
All right. Well, so the interesting thing about complex adaptive systems is they evolve and they respond to unexpected circumstances and disruption. So I'll pretend that that's what I am, a complex adaptive system that is responding and evolving to unintended circumstances here. But the conference title, Sustainable Development for a Dynamic Planet, Lessons, Priorities, and Solutions. And the question I want to put out right away is, what do we mean by dynamic planet when we think about it? Yeah, everything's changing, things are changing fast, but what do we mean by dynamic planet? And should our understanding of the planet being dynamic, should that impact the lessons, thank you very much, the lessons, the priorities and solutions that we have and develop? So, I want to suggest that the planet is dynamic, and it's dynamic because it is a complex adaptive system. I want to suggest that many human associations, including all of us here at this conference, constitute a complex adaptive system. They're self-organizing, and they exhibit something called coevolution. And I'll get into what that means, and there's just these wonderful examples of how that works in nature that I think you'll find enthralling. My understanding is that sustainable development should really aim at creating institutions and enabling processes that facilitate self-organization and coevolution. And that may be not the way you think about it, but I'm going to ask your indulgence for a while to give me a chance to suggest that that's a good way to think about it. And finally, I'm going to suggest that we can actually use nature as our guide in this endeavor. Why would why am I approaching it this way? Well, if we're advancing sustainability, who are we struggling against? Right? Sustainability seems like kind of motherhood and apple pie. Everybody should be for it. Who could be against it? If we're the us, who is the them? Well, okay, we know there's some bad guys out there. They're motivated by money, and they are, sending climate change in the wrong direction and all sorts of other things. But it's not just, of course, fossil fuel companies. All the industries, including the digital industries, use massive amounts of energy, stunning amounts, especially with the development of AI now, and that's all having an impact. But of course, we can't just blame it on everybody else. This is us. We like to drive our cars. We like to fly in planes. We like to have all the digital, technologies. We like to live in our nice houses. So it's us. It's not just them. And it's us in part because we're stuck in consumer culture. That largely defines, I certainly wouldn't say the reality for everyone in the world, far from that, but for many people in the world, and for many of the people that I think we have to consider are part of the problem, at least as much as they're part of the solution. And we know what that's about. There's a consumer culture which has us oriented to having more stuff all the time. We just got through Black Friday here before the holidays, when the best parts of people come out as they try to get new televisions and other things. And it is not a pretty sight. You can find this sort of stuff on social media. And I like this, only in America would you trample each other for sales the day after we give thanks for what we have. Because Black Friday, of course, is linked to Thanksgiving. And while we're doing that, and while the companies that are polluting and creating climate change and causing the loss of biodiversity are doing that, there's a lot of this going on. 90% of products out there that are said to be green, that's greenwash, which is to say it's not true or it's not true enough. And you see it sort of everywhere, And it's not just greenwashing. There's something I want to call green charades. Charades is that pantomime game where you're pretending to be something that you're really not. Most of us, you know, here in Florida and probably elsewhere, we recycle our plastic. But the fact of the matter is, very little of that plastic ever gets recycled. Only 9% of plastic is ever recycled. Much of the stuff that we put in our recycling bin actually gets trashed, thrown away, or burned. Some of it, amazing amounts, gets shipped overseas to places that don't have good disposal techniques. And you can see the results along most beaches now, increasingly in Florida, certainly around much of the rest of the world, where we are floating in plastic all over the place. But we pretend we're recycling it. So greenwashing and green charades are personally, they're in my life, certainly nationally and internationally prolific. And I think Greta was onto something when she said, this is the age of the great greenwashing machine. And those of us who are focused on sustainability, I think, have to be careful about that and how much that's an issue. But it's not just about money and consumption and how we might want to hide the effects of that through greenwashing or green charades. It's also about power and freedom. So Agenda 21, you're probably all familiar with that, a non-binding UN action to advance sustainable development. Out of that came these Sustainable Development Goals. But not everybody thinks that's such a good idea. Some see it as an effort to impose a despotic form of global rule. You can look at things like the book Behind the Green Mask that was written, and you can see the responses to this. There's a lot of people out there that look at sustainability as a dangerous force in the world and something that is really kind of a soft despotism. Institutes like the Post-Sustainability Institute wants to work against the imposition of communitarianism as a force in the world. It's not just in America. This is out of Germany. The green dictator, eco-dictator, no thank you. So there's a lot of this reaction to sustainability as this kind of top-down force, a sovereign force that is out to manage all our lives and keep us from having the things we want. So how can we advance sustainability in the face of big money, a force that's been a huge force in the world since forever, massive consumerism, which we all participate in, and concerns about soft despotism? And I want to suggest that we shift our thinking a little bit, so we're not so much focused on sustainability as a centralized form of kind of top-down resource management, focused on making things more efficient and consumption a little less wasteful. And we move towards understanding sustainability as fostering self-organization and co-evolution within complex adaptive systems. So that's where I'm going to take you now, in kind of a whirlwind tour. So here's a simple system, a bicycle. You know, you turn the pedals, they turn the crank, that turns the chain, which turns the back wheel, and the back wheel propels the front wheel forward, and you've got a simple system. And if you want to stop, an old bike, you just reverse that, and it stops. Here's a complex system. A complex system is a bunch of simple systems put together. So you have simple systems. You could think of the brakes as one, suspension, exhaust, yada, 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 all of them put together, and you've got a complex system, a bunch of heterogeneous parts, different sort of parts acting together, usually to achieve some particular end state. Here's complex adaptive systems. Every ecosystem in the world is a complex adaptive system. And you have, like in a complex system, a bunch of different heterogeneous components interacting together. But what makes a complex adaptive system different is it's adaptive, which is to say, unlike a car, it can respond to disruption, it can repair itself, it can adapt to changing situations, and it can evolve. And this is done in complex adaptive systems by means of self-organization and coevolution. So I'll get into explaining exactly what that's about. And these are all complex adaptive systems that have these characteristics. So, yeah, they're interactive, lots of elements coming together and interacting. How do they evolve and change and respond to environmental circumstances? Well, let me tell you a story that I love. Back in 1862, this man, Charles Darwin, received an orchid in the mail from a friend. It was from Madagascar. Darwin turns out, quite into these orchids. And you see they're beautiful flowers. The interesting thing about it is here's what's called the nectary. And this is where the nectar is, and this is where it would get pollinated. So Darwin looks at this and he says, that's interesting. I bet there's a moth out there, a butterfly, that has a proboscis that is as long as that nectar. Because that's the way he thought of these things. And it turns out there is. Here's the sphinx moth. Its proboscis is as long as the nectary because it has to send it down there to the bottom where it gets its nectar and where it does the pollination. So think of this. How did this come about? An orchid with a really long nectary and a moth with a really long nose, as it were. Having those things on their own would be a deficit, right? If you're a moth and you only have to pollinate small nectaries, then having something 5 times as long is just going to get you in trouble. So you don't want that. Likewise, if you're an orchid with a really long nectary that nothing can reach, you're never going to be able to reproduce. So here you have a situation of coevolution, where moth and orchid evolve together. They co-evolve in a dance over time that wasn't choreographed. There was no one out there trying to make that happen. It just happened. And nature is filled with these examples of coevolution, where the message is, agents compose relationships. Agents constitute relationships. But relationships also change agents. And so, that's why I wanted to say that this meeting is kind of like that, right? The meeting brings together a bunch of agents to form relationships, but then hopefully the relationships you form are going to change the agents. This gentleman, J.E. Lovelock, back in the 60s, was he was given the task of thinking about whether there was life on Mars. And NASA at the time was thinking about sending some sort of vehicle that could go to Mars and collect samples and try to figure out whether there was life on it. That would have been very expensive, technologically challenging, and Lovelock said there's a better method. What we should do, we should look at the atmosphere of Mars and see if it bears the telltale signs of life. And he did that through spectroscopy, where you look at the planet and see the sort of prism of light that comes from the atmosphere, and that can tell you what sort of gases are in the atmosphere, and that tells you, he said, whether there's life on the planet. So he said Mars was dead, and that proved to be true. The more interesting thing is thinking about that caused him to create this Gaia hypothesis, where he said the Earth is a complex adaptive system that has evolved together. And the example he used to explain that was what he called Daisy World. You may be familiar with this. It's a beautiful example, theoretical, elegant. And the idea is you have a planet and all that's on it are daisies, black or white daisies. So they start out relatively evenly dispersed. It turns out that the black daisies, which absorb the sun, do a little better on this relatively cold planet, and so they proliferate until virtually all the planet is covered in black daisies. But that heats up the planet, and that means it gets too hot for many of the black daisies. So the white daisies start spreading, and now the white daisies start doing better, and because they do better in a hotter planet. until the planet's virtually covered with white gases. But then it swings back. And Lovelock said, there's no sovereign organizing this. There's no choreographer. It's adaptive change, self-organized change that happens on a planet where the black and white daisies eventually will meet some sort of equilibrium and the planet will function on its own. And he wanted to say, that's what happens here on our planet. The hydrosphere, the water, the pedosphere, the soil, the atmosphere, and the biosphere all work together in a coevolutionary, self-organizing fashion to make the planet a place that is conducive to life. And that's why we're here now. So how do human adaptive systems sustain themselves? We know how the planet does it. It's very complex and really interesting, and scientists around the world study it. How do humans do it? Well, some people said that the only way for us to sustain ourselves is to have a sovereign power, someone who's in control, someone who's managing it. And Garrett Hardin, back in '68, published in Science, Tragedy of the Commons. I expect many of you are familiar with it. I'll go over the argument, also very elegant, very quickly. So you've got a commons, which is, let's say, a pasture land, and there's no one in charge. So you've got herders, people who have sheep or cows, and they bring their sheep or cattle to the pasture land so they can graze. But since no one's in charge, there's nothing to keep the herders from putting more and more of their sheep on the pasture land. So everybody does it. Eventually, there's so many sheep that they graze the commons until it's just a hard scrabble wasteland and trample it underfoot, and then nothing grows anymore. And then the sheep die, the herders die or go out of business, and you've got a tragedy. And the tragedy is because there's no one in charge. There's no sovereign who can say you can only graze 10 sheep. And Hardin argued that that's the problem with the human planet. So we either need a global government, but that brings up that issue of soft or hard despotism for people who worry about that, obviously. Or he said, maybe you put everything as private property, and then you've got an individual who owns the property, and he or she is sovereign, and he or she will protect that. Of course, we know that in reality, governments aren't that good at sustaining resources, and neither are private landowners. But that was the idea. Sustainability requires sovereignty. And then this person came along, Elinor Ostrom, a political scientist, like myself, but she got the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009. And what she found by studying what are called commons or common pool resources, might have been a fishing village, might have been a group of indigenous people who manage their forest lands. She found that commons, that is, places where there is no sovereign, no one absolutely in charge, could be well managed by a bunch of individuals working together. But some conditions had to hold. You have to have clear rules for behavior, strict monitoring and enforcement based on local ties and trust, and an awareness of individual and collective self-interest. And when that happens, she proved, Hardin was wrong. A commons does not become tragic. It can be sustained over time. And as I said, she showed this for many village fishing communities, lots of different resource-based communities. It's also evident in a lot of other places. This is in Europe. I wish it were in America now. There are a few places in America that they do this. This is a bunch of parents getting together in bicycle pools to take their kids to school in a safe way so they don't have to ride buses or be driven by cars. And they work with local communities to open up the streets for that twice a day. That's a commons. This is an organization, 350.org. You can imagine what that 350 is supposed to stand for, where we would have hoped to have kept the carbon in our atmosphere. Organized spontaneously, they've worked around the world. They're still at it, trying to figure out how we can better mitigate climate change. But it's in all sorts of things. You know, kids playing hide and seek. There's no sovereign. There's no one in charge. There are rules, right? Standards and rules matter, Norms matter. But they go about their business without someone absolutely in charge, and it works out wonderfully. And you know, basketball court in the neighborhood is the same sort of deal. We can look at what we do as associations and model it kind of on what the planet does as a complex adaptive system, channeling self-organization and coevolution to heighten our resilience. But unlike the planet, we can think, and we can think about long-term benefits. And so the neat thing about human complex adaptive systems is consciousness can complement coevolution. But going back to Eleanor Ostrom and her discoveries, a couple things have to happen for human complex adaptive systems to sustain themselves. First, structures, rules, and norms matter. So think back to the kids playing tag or hide and seek, right? You don't follow the rules, the game falls apart. And if you're in the fishing village that limits the amount of fish you can take every day, if you have someone that's not following it, it falls apart. So structures, rules, and norms really matter. And you can think of it this way too. We can experience freedom and joy and learning and speaking only because we follow the rules of grammar and syntax. Otherwise, nothing holds. So even if you're interested primarily in freedom to express yourself, you have to follow rules for that to be possible. So you think of the rules or the structures as the places that allow all the dynamism to take place. Just like, again, in this meeting, we need a room and we need organized sessions for the talk sessions and all the dynamism and all the relationships to take place. That's just to say that diverse, dynamic, enduring relationships also matter. And this is crucial. And this gets us to this notion of, there's a notion in complex adaptive systems which is emergence. And that just to say that when you have a bunch of these relationships in interaction, they can create things that aren't obvious from the relationships themselves. So, being alive, no one really can tell you what that means, but we do know you don't understand what being alive is by looking at a bunch of molecules, which at the end of the day is all we're composed of. Or consciousness, whatever that is, whatever that mystery is, you can't understand it by looking at a bunch of nerve synapses in the brain. So the short of it is when you put a lot of heterogeneous agents together in relationships that are structured, new things happen that you can't predict. New things emerge, hence the notion of emergence. That's been captured by P.W. Anderson came up with this wonderful line, more is different, more isn't just more. And in complex adaptive systems, you get the emergence of self-organization and coevolution that you couldn't predict just by looking at all the agents involved. And there's a Sufi quote that I love about this. You think because you understand one, you must understand two, because one and one make two. But you also must understand and. And that understanding of and, of the relationships and the dynamism that lets self-organization and coevolution occur is crucial. We don't understand and very well. Okay, well, I've said that. But remember, we're not just like the Earth. Consciousness can complement coevolution for us. So the question there, I think, to ask is, what might commoners or anyone in an association intentionally do to facilitate the self-organization and coevolution that secures the resilience of a complex adaptive system? And in my research on this, I've come up with 4 things that I think help. We can deepen diversity, and I'll go over each of these and why I think they're the case. We can distribute intelligence, we can embrace disturbance, and we can practice safe-to-fail experimentation. So let's dig into each of those for a moment. So one of the cool things that scholars have found out is that large groups of average intelligent people, or averagely skilled people, can outperform groups of smarter people or more skilled people if those sort of lesser tier groups have greater diversity in them. A multiplicity of heterogeneous agents facilitates adaptive innovation better than, on the surface, a bunch of more homogeneous agents that happen to have higher capacities. Hong and Page and many other scholars have done this work, and it's verified again and again. And one of the reasons is if you have a homogeneous group, sometimes that narrows the purview of how you're looking to solve a problem. There's sort of a groupthink that takes place. There's less varied experiences that come in to do that. And so in human groups, like in ecosystems, diversity functions as a means of strengthening resilience and buttressing adaptive innovation. So you don't have to embrace diversity just because you think it's a nice thing. You can embrace it because it actually works, not all the time, but if you're interested in adaptive solutions in complex situations, diversity is better than ability, or at least complements it. Okay, distributing intelligence and leadership. So if you're in a sovereign system, typically there's a sovereign who makes the rule. That could be an individual or a body of individuals. And then everybody else is on a need-to-know basis. And yeah, let's recognize that some people have said that sovereignty is dead, but it's not dead. You only have to look at the rise of executive power in this country and in many other countries around the world to know that sovereignty is around and is exerting its force in a big way. But in a commons, if you have diverse agents who share leadership and share skill sets, you can have much better effects and heightened resilience. One of the reasons for that is that we should think of sustainability as achieving what it achieves in part because it's more like a cable than a chain. If you have a chain, all you have to do is break one link and it falls apart. And typically that link might be the person with the information they need to know. So you can decapitate it and the system falls apart. Sustainability in commons are organized much more like a cable, which is formed by a bunch of different filaments. A few of those can fray and it still holds together in a much more resilient manner. So distributed intelligence heightens resilience because it is a way of fostering self-organization and coevolution. Not all good things go together, however. And one of the impacts of distributed intelligence and leadership is commons and complex adaptive systems do not operate in the most efficient manner. And we know that from nature. Nature isn't that efficient. There's a lot of waste in nature. Now it all gets recycled, but there's a lot of inefficiency in it and a lot of redundancy. But the benefit of redundancy is you don't have a system where there's a crucial node that if injured, that link in the chain, or broken, the whole system falls apart. There's redundancy, so the system keeps going because you have distributed intelligence and leadership. Embracing disturbance. Well, this picture may give you the idea of what I'm after here. You have an oyster or some other bivalve And, you know, a beautiful thing, a pearl forms in it. Why does that pearl form? Because there's an irritating grain of sand that has entered it, and it coats it with this super hard, beautiful material in order to not be disturbed by it as much. So in a complex adaptive system, disturbance is required for the system to function optimally. Disturbance is required. So embracing disturbance is important. And if you suppress disturbance, you end up with bigger problems than embracing it. And let me just give you a couple of examples of that. So this is a lodgepole pine. These are the pine cones of the lodgepole pine. And the seeds for it are inside. So if this is going to regenerate, or a forest is going to regenerate, this pine cone has to open and those seeds have to be released. Does anybody know what releases, what opens this pine cone? Fire. Right. In fact, you need fires that get up to about 140 degrees Celsius to actually open these. A pretty hot fire. So without fire, lodgepole forests will not regenerate. And if you suppress fire, then when the fires do come, they're catastrophic, and you get just destruction, where the cones and everything just burn up as well. And we're seeing that in real time around the world. Los Angeles is a more recent situation where the suppression of prescribed burns has not only suppressed the regrowth of trees, but is creating catastrophic fires. Over here we have people voting in an election, and I think in human systems we can look at elections similar to kind of prescribed burns, right? It's a way to recycle material. It's a way to change out the elites. It's a small disturbance, right? The system just doesn't keep going as it's been going. You have to change the administration, a bunch of bureaucrats lose their jobs, others come in. It's a big deal. And we do it on a periodic basis because it builds resiliency for the democratic system as a whole. So in any complex adaptive system, whether it's a lodgepole forest or whether it's a democracy, embracing disturbance is a good thing. But that's kind of hard to sometimes accept because, you know, naturally we want to just avoid disturbance, which messes things up. The last thing is practicing safe-to-fail experimentation. So complex adaptive systems are complex, and they are too complex for us to really understand completely or get our arms around completely. Certainly that's the case for the Earth. And if you look at the best climate science, they don't know that much what's going to really happen because they don't know whether we're already past the tipping point. They don't know what's going to happen when we go past the tipping point. A lot of speculation. But the system is too complex to actually manage, at least manage from a sovereign management point of view. Given that, the only thing that we can do is a more humbler and responsive approach where we engage in what we call safe-to-fail experimentation. You're experimenting, you're doing it in a way that if you get it wrong is not going to be catastrophic. From the experiment you get results, feedback, you integrate that feedback, and you do another experiment. There's been a suggestion that that's the way we should look at political policies. Of course, politically that's really challenging because you don't get many politicians that are going to go up there and say, I propose this, but it's just an experiment, don't know if it's going to work out. But we know that most of the policies don't really work out anyway. We're just not candid about it. So, and if you practice safe-to-fail experimentation, then the resilience of your complex adaptive system comes about because you're synthesizing conservation, self-education, and creativity. And again, it's looking at what you're doing as an experiment to be tested, learned from, and then redeployed in some other fashion. Adaptive co-management, if anybody's familiar with that term, is often used to manage ecosystems, and it's based on this same premise of stakeholder involvement to conduct small-scale experiments in adaptively managing an ecosystem. So that's the argument, and I promised I'd suggest how we can look to nature as a guide in this endeavor. So, naturam sequi, follow nature, that's the Latin from Roman times, but it's across indigenous cultures and ancient wisdom traditions, the benefit of following nature. And you can see there's Zeno, a Greek philosopher who had the same idea. And you can get where I'm coming from because I've used lots of examples of how complex adaptive systems in nature and their capacity for self-organization and coevolution is how we should model our human societies. Importantly, I do want to underline Goethe's understanding of nature and what it really means to follow nature. If we want to achieve a living understanding of nature, we must follow her example and become as mobile and flexible as nature herself. Oftentimes people think of nature as some sort of equilibrium or some sort of static situation, but it's not. It's constantly adaptive, and in nature, if you don't adapt, you die. For those who don't adapt in nature, we have a word, it's called extinction. So we have to model ourselves on that. And actually, nature shows us how we can do that as well. Nature plans to survive. It does that with DNA, which are meant to be faithfully replicated. That's what makes for nature and species in all organisms on the earth. It's the genetic plan for survival. Just like that, human associations and organization needs to have rules and norms and standards that are clearly articulated, well understood, and embraced in order to survive. You can't play tag unless everybody understands the rules of the game and follows them. But nature also adapts to thrive. We know that it's not all just about replicating DNA. It's about the fact that DNA mutates. And that's what makes for the abundance of species. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 9 million of them on the planet, or much more than that, depending upon how it gets counted. And in nature, we know that species that survive are the most adaptable. So human associations also have to be culturally and technologically adapted. I like this book by Hawken and Lovins, Natural Capitalism. And this line in particular: the most unlikely environmental scenario is that nothing unlikely happens. The biggest surprise would be no surprises. So following Goethe, we have to be as adaptive and nimble as nature herself, because we know there are going to be surprises. And I want to suggest we can plan to be surprised if we do these things. Deepen diversity, distribute intelligence, embrace disturbance, and practice safe to fail experimentation. Finally, one word from Bill McKibben, who started 350.org. We need to figure out how to adapt to that which we cannot prevent, but even more desperately, we need to figure out how to prevent that to which we cannot adapt. And certainly that's where we are in the realm of climate change, and I would argue also in the realm of biodiversity loss. So thanks for your attention, and I think we have some time for questions.
We do. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. We've agreed Leslie will field his own questions rather than me moderating. So who's first? Please.
Well, I think your presentation was very optimistic. I understand, I agree that coevolution is more than adaptability. It's mutual adaptability and so on. But there are cases where there are tipping points. And we know that. I mean, a meteor killed all the dinosaurs, Ice Age, I don't know what happened, but we are on the verge of a new system where human beings are creating situations which could lead to tipping points, where we would not survive. Simply the planet would not survive. Given all the co-evolution on Earth, simply we will not be able to withstand it. That's what worries us now, I guess. So I said that.
Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, I don't know that I'm optimistic. I don't really. I mean, I think optimism is often, you know, it's something everybody is supposed to be these days. Certainly, if you're in the business world. The only business people that aren't supposed to be optimistic, I think, are insurance agents. But you know, it's like if you don't come out and say you're optimistic, you know, you lay out. So many speeches go this way. They lay out the problems, like, and we're going to hell in a handbasket, and then, but I'm optimistic, and the reason is, you know, yada yada yada. So I get it that you know, I don't want to say I'm optimistic because it's not only that we're approaching tipping points, I think we don't know whether we've passed tipping points. We just don't have the knowledge yet to know whether we've passed them. And if we've passed them, yeah, in a climate situation, there's going to be hell to pay, and we may not be able to adapt to that system, or at least civilization won't be able to adapt to that situation. So I won't speak about optimism. I'll speak about hope. David Orr, another political scientist at Oberlin College who developed the Sustainability Institute there, said that hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up, which is to say, hope is about taking action. And it's about taking action to create a better future. It's not about having the belief that we have a better future. The first, that one is optimism, just we believe it's going to be better. Hope is about taking action to do something to make it better. Regardless of whether you're a betting person and believe that that action is going to fully achieve your vision. So that, yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at. It's about having hope and instilling hope, even when the situation appears to suggest that catastrophe is just yards away.
You gotta have hope. I love that. That's great. Thank you. I was thinking about, I'm glad you brought up the idea of efficiency. When I think of efficiency, I sometimes think of it as an enemy to fulfilling a life that is purposeful and happy. And so I'm wondering if I have this orientation to the notion of efficiency being a myth that is going to clear some pathway towards more purposeful action. After hearing your talk, how can I think of efficiency as being that disturbance that I need to embrace? So if we have this myth of efficiency, because to me I think of efficiency as just creating more work to be done. It's never clearing a path for us to have this liberation. Is efficiency in and of itself perhaps a disturbance that maybe personally speaking I need to embrace?
Okay, yeah, I'm not completely sure I understand the idea of efficiency as a disturbance, but let me try to unpack it and see whether I'm getting close. So yeah, I'm someone who loves efficiency, and you know, some of us are wired that way, and we like things to, you know, work well. And certainly a lot of sustainability is about efficiency. You know, there's the notion of eco-efficiency, about having a bigger bang for the buck, about producing less waste, and that's a big part of it. And it can be no doubt, right? We need to make better use of our energy use, and so forth and so on. But what I like about the whole literature on complex adaptive systems and commons and self-organization and all that is it says you can have too much of a good thing. So efficiency is a good thing, but if you have too much of it, and that's what it's all about, and the means to get that efficiency is to have some sort of sovereign out there letting you know exactly what needs to take place all the time, then what you undo is all the ferment and fecundity of the self-organization and the redundancies and the interactions that create new things, right? So, you know, again, nature can be our guide in this. If DNA were 100% efficient, which is to say, it always faithfully replicated, right? Would that be a good thing?
Sounds like cancer, right? Like that would be a
Well,
problem.
it would be a problem because when there's an environmental disturbance, you wouldn't have any mutations that could better adapt to that world, and you'd have just mass extinction. Or think of it this way. You know, we have a lot of squirrels in Florida where I live. They gather nuts and eat them later on. But it turns out that they're pretty forgetful, and so squirrels only find maybe 20% or less of the nuts they hide. And, you know, I tell my students, well, maybe we could fit them out with like something attached to their brain so they remember where all their nuts are, and that would make things much more efficient. Is that a good thing? Well, the problem with that is squirrels aren't just gathering nuts to eat. They're foresters. They're planting nuts to become trees. And so if you had a generation of squirrels that were 100% efficient at gathering nuts, you wouldn't have a forest for the future generations of those squirrels. So again, you know, efficiency within balance, but it shouldn't overwhelm all the fertility and fecundity of a bunch of interacting agents that are developing new things, often in an experimental fashion. And experiments aren't efficient, right? That's the whole point. You're out there, you're trying something, it doesn't work, you try something else. Please.
Thank you for this fascinating talk. I really enjoyed it. But I'm going to add a little bit of pessimism again. And it's about really, I mean, I understand the point and share this view that we need to adapt to nature, that we need to respect its principles, and so on and so forth. And I understand that the criterion to understand those principles would be science. But in the public perception, in public discourses, nature can be used for all kinds of purposes, right? It's a very capacious and ambiguous concept, and it can be hijacked by far-righters, by fascists, and it can mean all kinds of things. It can be justified to scapegoat immigrants, to compare them to invasive species. I mean, all kinds of political agendas can, in the public mind, be associated with nature's laws. So what's the way out of this dilemma in the world of fake news and fake facts?
In the world of what?
Fake news, fake facts,
Okay.
alternative science.
I'm glad you asked. Just make it an easy question. Yeah, so, you know, I was brought up as a political scientist way back before a lot of fake news. We used to call fake news propaganda, and it's only what other guys did or what people did in wartime. Now it's everywhere. But back in the day, there was a political philosopher, J.S. Mill, and he had this, what now seems a naive notion, and it's that truth will win out. What you need is a forum, you know, you need a place for everybody to voice their opinions, and at the end of the day, if everybody can speak freely, the stronger argument and the truer argument is going to win. And that was his cause for optimism, and that's why he was a staunch believer in liberal democracy, which creates freedom of association, freedom of press, which allows all that to happen. You're absolutely right that nature is used for abominable purposes and always has been. I mean, the Nazis used, you know, the notion of Blut und Boden, blood and soil, as what they were grounded on, and we know the results there. I don't know an alternative to telling other stories, you know, the notion that you have to tell your story, and yeah, there's always going to be antagonistic ones out there. I worry now more than I've ever about this, you know, notion of rabbit holes in cyberspace and fake news, and it comes from talking to friends who have ideas I can't understand, and after talking to them a while, I realize they got it from being down some rabbit hole and they've come to be sucked in. That causes me, you know, if I'm pessimistic, it's like I don't know the answer to that, because we live in an ecosystem where it's pretty obvious that sovereign control of the internet is not the answer, because that's just totalitarianism. What is going to be the answer is figuring out how to create standards and norms that we can live with, and that will allow stories that, and truths and science to reassert to have a better chance of winning against some of the other stuff out there. And I spend as much of my time now working in the area of emerging tech and digital technology as anything else for that reason. But yeah, at this point in time, there's lots of reasons to be pessimistic. I have to give you that.
Thank you.
Oh, we're out of time?
Last question.
We put someone way in the back, yeah.
Going back to that first question, do you think the biggest species has a slow moving video glacier that's actually causing the massive extinction, and therefore it makes some kind of sense in the broader system?
So can we look at humanity itself as like a meteor or a glacier that's causing the devastation, right? That was the question? Sure, yeah, I mean, that's often the way we're looked at, you know, and you know, Dave Foreman and others have called humanity a cancer on the planet because of the way we're expanding, propagating, and taking everything in. But I would say, as much as we are the problem from an ecosystemic point of view, we are obviously the solution as well. I mean, there's no one else out there that's going to figure this out if not us. And so, again, it gets back to, you know, fighting the good fight, having hope, and I think being informed by science enough to know that simple and simplistic solutions won't work. You know, along the sovereign model, we have to understand the complexity of the situation and the capacities within complex systems for adaptation and help generate that. And it won't be fast, but I don't know another means that gives us more hope for coming out of the other end of the tunnel.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Everybody, so we're going to move, before everyone leaves, I'm going to ask one thing before we go, and a delegate has requested that, but after this we are moving to the talking circles. I know how attractive the coffee is. We do say coffee, but if all of you grab coffee, it's going to be a little bit of an issue, so if you need your coffee, grab it, but then please make your way to the talking circles. Don't be shy here. Before you go, I want to take a picture of everybody. This is my one request. So, okay. Are you ready, everybody? Can I get you all in? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Smile. I have a joke for all of you, so to make you laugh. You know, it's fine because the planet will survive. Just we won't. Thank you.
You are not in the picture. You should also.
Oh, me, okay, ready, okay, even better, here we go, look at this one here. That's genius, ready? Thank you so much. I'm very familiar with great opening, great intro, big ideas, optimism of the world, you're
Sorry.
Where are you going to
Believe it or not, I live in Champagne. I've been much years. I can't lose my accent.
Yeah, exactly. That's my picture. I was up to this. Yeah, I know. I'll just spend a couple seats. Ready? Okay, let's go this way.
I think it's photo time. We have photos taken up with
And then got the you have your business card place once. Give him one. Nice. Cabinet.
Oh, I think that one's mine. Sorry. Oh no. Oh, mine is here. Sorry. You're good.
Where are you from?
In Indianapolis. Here in the United States, in Indianapolis. Oh, here, I have this for you. Oh.
How much of it filters down so that you actually get government of the same beneficial nature?
So the whole thing is I can take the picture of you. I can take your picture of you.
Other serving interests, so basically embedding governance for other serving interests in other words. So
I'll wait outside for you.
profit maximising to purpose-driven organisations, and I'm working on the ISO purpose-driven organisations. Describes what it is about that. And then financially driven work lives to meaningful. So describing what the assumptions of the economy are, and then therefore that three-level shift goes from self-governance to organisational governance to governance of the economy, which essentially threads through much greater clarity about how governance direction, in other words, optimise the parameters, in other words, rules, provide the conditions for some dynamic strategy. We don't have it
Fake news and all that, and you mentioned self-governance, and that's one of the things that
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'll see you around.
work with students today, we realize that the loss of answers are very effective. And self-governance is shrinking in the sense that they are affecting all of whatever media grows to them. And the notion of self-governance in terms of self-discipline.
And you have a stoic there who's at the heart of that, yeah.
And so that notion of going all the way up and down. Thank you for your time.
And what's missing, and that's what really a lot of my life's work is until we're really clear about what governance is, how it structures decision-making, how it frees strategy, and why strategy is not the same as governance. And we haven't had that until we had ISO 470. It took 5 years, signed up 164 countries. Previous to that, governance as a discipline had grown up in the logic of one economy that's killing us, in the mindset of the machine, not the adaptive system. So we are now at a cusp point, and the book is there literally just as one other mechanism to sort of synthesize this and say, do you want to be a leader for a sustainable future? We've got to A, be clear what sustainability means as a value creation objective, long-term well-being for all. Then we need to create governance systems.
Sorry.
Yes, so the work is to bridge academic capacity, and it's well on the way. But I think what's really exciting and why because you've synthesized the field of complex systems, which needs to
Okay, where are you from?
and with that emphasis on from Lovelock, Harding to Boston, the elephant in the room is the how, and everything that's been done on these governance and purpose standards is the answer. And it's been done in a globally co-creative way, which means that it's not owned by any one system. So you are building in distributive governance from the outset. It's called Beyond Profit, Purpose, and Leadership for Well-Being. But online, I have so many podcasts and videos, because I basically go around doing keynotes and presentations, plus the ISO work. That's pretty much when I left the time I got 6 years ago. I only went into academia to work out what the hell was the problem.
You want to meet right back for coffee? Yeah, perfect.
So, yes, it is. Yeah. So anyway, I would be super happy to signal more specifically that neat synthesis that you have somewhere in my book, because then I draw on it, but I'll synthesize it somehow. And secondly, I think if you are genuinely wanting to create change in the way you're doing, I think work on the ISO and stuff that's in the book would be interesting. I'm sure we have lots of shared contacts and things going on out there. So.
Thanks for making the connection. I'll check it out on LinkedIn, and that way is a means of gaining access to some of the things you published or spoken.
Yes, and then I'd love to receive. Fantastic. Okay. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. Are you familiar with Universalist Unitarianism?
A little bit.
Okay, I'm just so eager to bring this conversation back to them as a self-organizing group, and communities of faith. I think this really works nicely, especially with an organization of faith that's so connected to policy and climate justice. So I just wasn't sure if you would consider everything you said in terms of how organizations of faith conduct themselves. We've gone through, I'm in New York, so we've gone through a leadership transition kind of in response to global events where we saw a transition over what was happening in Gaza. And so we're in a transition where we're helping welcome a new reverend, and there's a whole 3-year period of like, how do we as a congregation even look appealing to a new reverend? Do we go with a co-reverend model? There's a lot happening, and I think this is a beautiful thing to kind of bring back to it and say, how do we co-evolve? So when I think of organizations as institutional, but I think around the topic of faith, I think this is going to be really juicy. And I'm so excited to bring it back to that particular community because it's not obvious.
Haven't thought about it in those terms, but certainly, I mean, my background, I'm no longer practicing, but I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, so there we have a sovereign. Right? You have, you have God, you have the Pope, you have the priest, and it's a pretty direct line of authority. And then, Unitarians, I used to hung out with them, have a few in my department, and I've gone to a couple of services and that. And the first time I went, it was like, this is a religious thing.
I don't feel discomfort. This can't be a religion. This is comforting.
I taught at Swarthmore College, which is Quaker.
Oh, okay.
So, I went to a couple of Quaker meetings just to explore them. And that's kind of a similar sort of...
Were they all shaking? No.
Yeah, they were shaking. But it was a similar sort of model of, first getting into the right place yourself. Usually with some silence or some meditation. And then, stuff just germinates in conversation, with the idea of everybody's equal, everybody has something to contribute, and then seeing where it goes. So, I think it's cool that you bring this up, and I hope it
I'm here. I think it is going to be helpful. I think we're straddling two things where I think we want a leader that just tell us what to do, but at the same time we respect pluralism and we respect. It's just a very tough time to figure out, and it is so self-governed. And
that balance, there's always the tendency to think, let's just focus on the agents and not focus on the rules and the structures. That's a mistake. Because agents only get their freedom by means of the rules and structure. And so in the complex adaptive system literature, there's they talk about it being an anarchic system, which says it doesn't have a leader, but it's not chaotic because it has these rules and structures that organize it. So they talk about the productive benefits of operating on what they call the edge of chaos. right?
Yeah,
And that's
okay,
the notion that
yeah.
you're not over the edge, where there's no rules and people just fall apart and you just
But you're still
burst.
creating enough gunk to nourish and
But
keep the
there's
cycle
enough
going.
nourishing stuff going
Yeah.
on. So
The fungus, you know. the
that
shit.
notion of being on the edge of chaos is, like you say,
Yeah.
organization. It's a little
Yeah.
sketchy, right?
Yeah.
Because you could always step over, and that wouldn't be a good thing.
Yeah. It's the right relations. It's how to become in right relation with one another, because it was very much so a pushing out of leadership, and we have to evaluate how are we civil?
Right.
You know, and that's a real issue when you think about, you know, the humanity. Yeah, this is great. I wasn't expecting to make the connection to church, but this is like fantastic.
Cool.
I hope to find some literature that might even be meaningful for us as a group to kind of read together around the complex of backup systems. I think is going to be lovely. So thank you so much for this.
All right.
Pleasure.
Thanks for talking about
Of course. Thank you for staying.
class. Hi. Yes. Are you logged in? You got to log in. And then press sign in. Go down here. Your events. And then you click manage proposal. It's a little complicated. Then you scroll down all the way. And then here, you upload it here. Choose file and you upload it.
What about the code here?
That's the embed code if you have a video.
Thank you so much.
This gentleman has a problem.
What's up?
Yeah, my office send me a credit card to confirm registration.
Okay, you need to go downstairs. To Alba.
They can do?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Go downstairs.
For 2%.
Yes, they can process it. Alba can process it downstairs. Not here. Downstairs, yeah.